The thing that I always see, I've been speaking about behavioral finance to advisors for, about a decade now. And so consistently when I go to speak to a group of advisors, we have a good laugh because this stuff is funny. Human behavior is goofy and weird and funny, and it's cool to learn about. So everyone eats it up. Everyone loves it. People come up to me after the show and go, I love this stuff. I believe in it, but what do I do about it? How do I systematize this? How do I bake this into the very fabric of my practice?
Welcome to the Model FA podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Brewer. Today's guest is Dr. Daniel Crosby, who's a psychologist and behavioral finance expert who helps organizations understand the intersection of mind and markets. Dr. Crosby's written a couple books. His latest work is The Behavioral Investor. It is a comprehensive look at neurology, physiology, and psychology of making sound financial decisions. Daniel, thanks for coming on the show.
No, thanks for having me.
Good stuff, man. I'm looking forward to our conversation. Honestly, it's been a little while since I've, sharpened my skills in the behavioral finance arena. I got the CFA and they got a couple chapters in there that I probably kind of breezed through. So I'm looking forward to learning a little bit on this episode as well. So just appreciate you being willing to come on the show and share your perspective with the listeners.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. And the CFA, I'm familiar with the CFA materials, and they're surprisingly comprehensive. So I'm actually pretty glad about how comprehensive the CFA, the behavioral finance piece of the CFA is. They've done a good job with it, I think.
Nice. Is that a recent change, or am I just forgetting the fact that I studied behavioral finance in depth a few years ago?
I couldn't speak to how recently. I couldn't speak to sort of the different iterations of it. But when I've seen it in recent times, I was like, wow, this is pretty good. I'm surprised at how thorough this is. So good job, CFA.
Nice. CFA Institute. Here we go. We got a plug for you. All right, let's get started, man. So why don't you give us a little bit of an overview of kind of your background, where you came from? I know that right now you're the chief behavioral officer at Brinker Capital. You're working on some behavioral fintech that advisors can potentially use and integrate into their practice. You've obviously done a lot of, writing on the topic of behavioral finance, helping consumers make better decisions with their money. What kind of got you interested in, behavioral finance? Talk us through where you came from and why you're doing all this stuff.
Yeah, so I think the very earliest exposure I had was my dad as a financial advisor. He's still practicing there in my hometown in North Alabama. So I grew up, the son of a financial advisor. And so I think sort of uniquely, I grew up talking about shares and stocks around the dinner table. I grew up learning about the miracle of compounding and sort of looking up to people like Peter Lynch and Warren Buffett. And so, I had a sort of a strange childhood in that respect. But when I got to school, I entered my freshman year of college without really any preconception of what I wanted to do. I was pretty aimless generally, and I just absolutely fell in love with the psychology courses that I took for part of my general education requirements. And so I quickly sort of decided I wanted to be a psychologist, and pursued that path all through undergrad. Loved it. Started a PhD program 3 days after I graduated with my undergraduate degree. Really enjoyed it until I got about 3 years into my doctoral program, and I really just started to burn out. The meeting with 40 or 50 clients a week, people who were addicted to drugs, people who were suicidal, people who were just coping with really heavy stuff, was beginning to take a personal toll on me. And so I sort of said, look, I love psychology. I love studying human behavior, but there's got to be a non-clinical application of this for me. And so I found my way into the world of banking. And my first gig out of school was actually doing pre-employment psychological assessments of bankers. So I would give them IQ tests and personality tests and the like, and, determine whether they were a good fit to work at the bank. And, long story short, within the bank, I ran into this world of behavioral economics and behavioral finance, and it was, it was a combination of two great passions of mine. So it's been an improbable but a great career.
Would you say that your interest primarily lies with helping consumers make better financial decisions as it relates to their behavior, or is it educating advisors about how to best talk to consumers so that they make better decisions? What's the intersection of your path? Is it both, as far as the intersection of behavioral finance and kind of how you like to apply those concepts? Is it working with consumers? Is it working with advisors? Is it working with the industry and creating like solutions that people can leverage? Like where do you find you have an interest at this point?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's two broad applications of behavioral finance. One is to help, individuals make better financial decisions, make, whether that's, through an advisor or directly with the end client. I enjoy both of those things a great deal. And there's a huge value add there. I think the second way that behavioral finance can be applied is to the actual investment decisions themselves, the actual selection of securities, the actual way that you manage money. I think there's behavioral lessons there. And so my next to last book, the book previous to my most recent book was called The Laws of Wealth. And that was all about the former, it was all about how do you make good decisions. And then the latest book, The Behavioral Investor, is sort of like, what are, for asset managers, for professionals, what are some of the things we should consider? So I love them both. In my day job, I spend a lot more time helping advisors help their clients. That's primarily where my professional focus is now. But I think both are rich areas for exploration. I think there's very little progress that's been made in many respects in both areas. And I think there's a lot of exciting stuff ahead in both areas.
Nice. In the most recent book, The Behavioral Investor, so you said that one is focused more on helping asset managers and those in the profession make better decisions. What are some of the things that you, I guess, talk about in the book? I remember when I was because I had a career in the asset management space for a number of years. I was at Vanguard and then DFA. And about the time when I left DFA, I want to say about 6-7 years ago, they were starting to incorporate momentum into their investment allocations. And it was up for debate whether momentum was a behaviorally driven kind of phenomenon or it was just kind of randomness, like, people basically trend following obviously would be kind of a behavioral phenomenon. I forget what the other explanation was. It's been a little while and I've kind of been removed from the investment side for a while. But what are some of the things that you talk about? Is it stuff like that on, dealing with momentum and making decisions around that as you start to build portfolios, or like what are the primary things that you discuss in that book?
Well, there's many things. I talk about being sort of a risk-first investor. So one of the cool things I think about the book is I took the universe of investor biases, which was about nearly 200 different biases now, and I boiled it down into what I think are sort of the 4 primary biases. And once you have a manageable number, you can create risk protocols and risk procedures that are robust to those 4. And so those 4 are ego, which is excessive, overconfidence, emotion, attention, and conservatism. So we can talk more about those if you'd like. So one of the things that we talk about is sort of behavioral risk. And I'm a big believer in systematic or rules-based investing. I think that's one of the most powerful ways to mitigate bias and sort of get out of your own way. I think that's a much more effective way to get out of your own way and get out of your own head than, say, just trying to learn about yourself and learn about your biases and discretionarily avoid them. And then, we even talk about stuff like you talked about, like what are the hallmarks of a good signal? What do you look for in a good signal? And then I write in there about how we can be sort of head faked by bad signals and, cutting to the chase. I think that behavior is the element that makes a factor or a signal endure. You talk about something like value or momentum, trend, these different things, they all have behavioral components to them. And I think that's why they've persisted over time, even when, we've discovered literally thousands of different market anomalies that are quickly arbitraged away. The ones that endure and the ones that tend to work over time are the ones that have a behavioral component to them.
Interesting. On the consumer side, I mean, the one thing that I've found, because I understand investing, I understand marketing to a fair degree now, since we have a marketing company, we do a lot of it. I find psychology pretty fascinating as well. And one thing that I've learned the hard way is it's very hard to change people's behavior. And it's also hard to sell them things that require them to change their behavior. They want to buy, a painkiller. They want to buy something that doesn't require them to take a lot of action. That's why I guess you see advertising that centralizes around take this pill and get a six pack, or, put this little weight belt on, it'll jiggle your stomach. And before you know it, you've got rock solid abs. So, what is the application on the consumer side? It's obviously if you want to get ripped, you eat a well-balanced diet, you track your macros, if you're bodybuilding, you go to the gym, you do all these things. But as it relates to consumers, that's kind of it's hard to change people's behavior. What are you finding for the consumer? What is their application as it relates to them, a behavioral finance context or otherwise, as far as that's concerned?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. One of the hardest things you can ever do is ask people to change behavior. And, I make the case in my last two books that, effectively, God or nature could not have designed a worse investor than you or I. We are like wired backwards in just about every conceivable sense when it comes to making good investment decisions. So, if it's hard for us to change our behavior around other things that are more intuitive, it's doubly hard for us to change our behavior around sort of financial principles. So I think there's a couple of things that we need. I say there's sort of a three-legged stool of what you need to make the right decisions. So the first one, and they all start with E, right? So the first one is education. Right. So we need to know what to do, of course. And there's a ton of talk right now about financial literacy and financial literacy initiatives. But I'm writing a white paper right now on financial education programs, and, cutting to the chase there, the track record is fairly abysmal. People lose 90% of their recall of what they learned in class within 6 months. I think we could all attest to have forgotten basically everything we ever learned in high school. And so, financial education, financial literacy is a start. It's not like it does nothing. But mostly what it helps with is meta knowledge. So meta knowledge is sort of knowing what you don't know, or knowing where to look for the right answers. So the first E is education, but it's admittedly, imperfect, and it's basically a guidepost for the rest of the journey. The second E is the right environment. So this is the right portfolio. At least part of the reason why investors are so unable to take the ride sometimes is because they're misallocated. So it's a natural precondition of having a good investment experience to be allocated in a way that is both going to get you to the finish line and do so in a way that is palatable enough for you that you don't get sort of bucked off the ride in the meantime. And then the final one where advisors come in and is perhaps the most powerful, and this is encouragement, which is basically another word for behavioral coaching or just-in-time advice. So financial literacy, in terms of like a one-time class setting, is not very powerful, but just-in-time advice, like, targeted, specific to you, real-time advice, real-time education is very, very powerful and very, very predictive of good behavior. So if you want to make good decisions, you need, the right knowledge, you need the right portfolio, and you need the right coach. And if you've got all three of these things, I have a great deal of faith in your ability to take the ride.
Love it. What about folks that can't? Because part of the challenge is, and I've seen this happen recently, because as you know, a lot of advisors are leaving more traditional structures. They're setting up their own firms. They're charging a monthly retainer to be able to help folks who may not have the financial resources or $1 million in assets to be able to invest and buy that portfolio, with the hopes of getting them on a more productive path so they can accumulate assets. What if someone can't afford that behavioral coach? Because being a coach is hard. Like, you've got to be able to know someone very deeply to understand kind of what their biases even are, what their goals are, how they think, what they want, what their vision is for their life. And you can really only do that with so many people. For me, I'd say maybe 50 is the most I could really retain that information for and actively be able to recall it and coach them. How does someone who maybe doesn't have the financial resources, or maybe doesn't really buy into the value of that? How do we either A, get them to see the value so that they would move forward, or B, how do we address that as a society for someone who can't afford that level of kind of one-on-one coaching?
Yeah, so I think there's never been a better time to be an investor. Asset management fees are falling effectively 10%, every year. And the cool thing is, I don't think, I'm biased. I don't think there will ever be anything to truly replace the behavioral coaching of a trusted confidant and a trusted advisor. But for people whose account sizes might not make them attractive for traditional advisors, or who are just getting started, there's thoughtful solutions. There's thoughtful solutions like Betterment. Betterment has a chief behavioral officer or head of behavioral finance in Dan Egan, who designs these just-in-time nudges within Betterment. If you're going to if you're going to sell a stock in Betterment, they will nudge you to say, like, are you sure you want to do that? For instance, here's the tax consequences of that. And so that is, in a real sense, just-in-time education as well. And so I don't think that anything ever quite takes the place of the human coach, of the human advisor. But I think it's a wonderful time to be an investor. And I think that, automated solutions are, in some cases, becoming very thoughtful about these things as well. The other thing that I would say, I think you brought this point up nicely, is that, human advisors need to do a better job of leading with this. There has been, for a very, very long time, I think Wall Street has told the story that, the value that the financial advisor adds to a client's life is that they, put them in outperforming funds, or, they're going to find them the next hot dot, or they have this knowledge that the client doesn't have. And, belief in that and the evidence for that is vanishingly small. And so I think where there is a great deal of evidence is there's a great deal of evidence that when advisors take a holistic approach, when they lead with behavioral coaching, there's stat after stat that finds that advisors who lead with behavioral coaching help their clients to the tune of 2 to 3% per year in improved outcomes every year, which would, over a long time period, potentially double your wealth. So behavioral coaching has been shown to increase happiness. It's been shown to increase wealth. It's been shown to increase levels of preparedness and feelings of calm. So behavioral coaching as a value add has an enormous literature behind it. It has a ton to recommend it. And I think advisors would be wise to lead with that more, because I think that's where they do the most good. And I think that's a story that the average client has not heard yet.
Yeah, I would agree that it absolutely does the most good. I mean, we've seen it in our practice at SurePath. That's primarily how we help folks, is by, educating them on their behaviors and helping them make better financial decisions so that they can, eventually get more assets and make the decisions more leveraged. But I think part of the challenge, though, putting my marketing hat on here for a second, is if an advisor goes to the marketplace and says, hey, you have a behavior problem and you need to modify your behavior in order to achieve wealth or in order to achieve the things that you want, you're back to that point where you're selling the gym membership instead of steroids, right? And most people, they don't want to go to the gym. They don't want to lift the weights. It's heavy. It hurts. I got to change my behavior. Like, what do you mean? Like, I have a behavioral problem that requires me to actually understand that I'm operating in an egoic state, and that there's aspects of my personality that may not be productively serving me. So I think it absolutely works, and I think it will lead to more referrals. It'll lead to a practice that flourishes over time. But I think leading with it from a marketing perspective could be costly, and it could create challenges for an advisor in the early stages of their practice. And I've actually seen this because there's been a number of people who have joined my programs, marketing programs over the years, and they had a desire to help with either cash flow coaching or kind of lead with that, the behavior on the behavioral coaching side. And it kind of, it was hard. It was expensive. It was hard for them to get people's attention. So I would love to hear if you have specific examples, or if you disagree, that'd be, I'm happy to take disagreements on this, but I've just seen, for some advisors, this has been a kind of a tough road. And I've even seen it in our own firm. So when we were selling primarily kind of marketing funnels and, all this, quote unquote, the sexy stuff as it relates to marketing. It's like, click this landing page, get your email, and oh my gosh, the person becomes a client like right away. It sounds a lot sexier than join my coaching program and I'm going to coach you to make better decisions so that you can effectively, create more awareness around these behaviors. And then, after you create this awareness, you're going to be making better, more leveraged decisions. That's going to create more income for you. It's going to create more space for you, which is absolutely true. And it's exactly what most even advisors need in their business. But they want to buy the steroids. They don't want to buy the gym membership. So how do you reconcile those things when an advisor or a consumer, what they really need is somebody to know them, to see where their blind spots are and to help them kind of guide them through that process. But they just want to buy the quick steroid injection and get like super jacked and get on the beach, like what's the solution to that? Or do you disagree?
Yeah, so I think it's a framing consideration because you're not wrong. Like no one wants to be told, like, again, this is why I try to get away from this sort of long lists of biases approach. No one wants to step into your office and you go, well, hey, I'm glad you're here. There's 200 ways that you can screw this up, because your brain, your brain doesn't work right. But luckily, here I come to save the day. To the
rescue.
I think the good news is though, a lot of this stuff. I have young kids. And so, sometimes if you're trying to get them to eat their vegetables, you have to kind of like grind them up and hide them in something. And I think that we can effectively sort of Trojan horse some of these behavioral interventions because things like goals-based planning, talking deeply about your goals and integrating them into a financial plan, like that is a behavioral intervention. I wrote a whole book on the behavioral aspects of goals-based planning. That's a deeply behavioral thing that doesn't lead with, look, you're a dummy and you can't do this without me. Yep. I think, focusing on the long term is a behavioral thing. I think that a socially responsible element to your practice is a behavioral consideration because so many people look at capital markets like they're video games and they're just kind of pinging up and down. But if you have a socially responsible or ESG element to your practice, this sort of reconnects people with the reality of fractional ownership of a business and says, hey, look, you're owning businesses that impact the world and impact people's lives, and let's be thoughtful about that. And oh yeah, the next time there's a 20% drop in the market, do you think this concerned citizen is more likely to sell the S&P or more likely to sell this fund that maybe means something more to them on a personal or values-based level? Mm-hmm. So all these things we do, I think, have a behavioral component to it because you're absolutely right. You do not want to lead with, advisor as savior and client as, confused dummy with behavioral problems. And you're also absolutely right that people don't like to do hard work. But I think the more that we can make this seem fun, informal, the more that it can be tied to people's values and preferences and goals and lifestyle, I think we can effectively sneak in some really powerful behavioral stuff in a way that doesn't feel quite so sterile or quite so hard.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's a great response. I think, the broccoli example just drove it home for me. It was perfect. Hey, Model FAs, I know you're enjoying this conversation, but I wanted to take a quick break to talk to you about the Model FA Accelerator. This is a unique collaboration between us and you, where we help you build a financial advising practice that you can be proud of. We focus on the foundational concepts around how to pick a niche or a specialization, how to price your services, how to construct an offer that people are going to buy, and then how to market it and sell it in a way that'll get people to sign on the dotted line and become clients of your firm, all while giving you the information to scale and set up workflows and operational processes that will allow you to reclaim your time and build a practice that doesn't run you. So if you'd like to hear more about that, go to www.modelfa.com/accelerator or www.modelfa.com. Hover over Work With Us and click on Accelerator. Hope to see you in the program. Is that what you guys are doing with this program that you're building, Tulip Advisor? Is it along similar lines as far as trying to get people to control their behavior or trying to help advisors better demonstrate the value of behavior modification and get people's attention with that? Can you talk me through what you're working on here with this fintech platform, Tulip?
Yeah, so which you can see at tulipadvisor.com or sign up for. It'll be demoed early next year. But it's actually a game, a very fun game that's a market simulation of 30 years of market history. So you get to make decisions about your portfolio. You get real-time reporting updates. You get news alerts and market prognostications and all the things that a real investor gets over an investment lifetime. And the client goes through this, and in the background, we're of course running a host of behavioral analytics that gives you insights into their sort of preferences. And so we do this for a couple of reasons, right? So first of all, we're going to create a portfolio for you that allows the client to take that ride, that maximizes the potential that they'll be able to last the 30 years of that market cycle. We're going to give you insights into that client's behavior and give them insights into their own behavior. And then finally, we give you just-in-time alerts. We give you real-time alerts. So when the actual market and their actual portfolio encounters the sort of scenarios that gave them trouble in the game, we alert the advisor in real time and say, effectively, hey, Patrick, you might want to call Mrs. Smith. She's feeling a little freaked out, and you might want to say the following script. And so we effectively tell you, who to call, when to call, what to say, to be a great behavioral coach. And then, it's also got a sales component to it because we monitor the cost of going it alone. We monitor how this client does in the game versus how they would have done with good advice. And I can tell you that in almost every case, it's very, very, very
different,
bad.
I assume.
And so I think it's going to be a great tool for advisors to start integrating behavioral finance into their practice in a more systematic way.
That's really neat, man. I think it would even be cool if, let's say, you had 10,000 people go through this tool, and then you can start to draw some conclusions around what that difference is statistically, and somebody goes through the game and, plays without any behavioral coaching and advice versus, if they're getting the right type of advice. So I think that has some neat applications on the data side too. What would you say is the primary value of the tool? Is it for the advisor to showcase the benefits of behavioral coaching so that the client sees it and moves forward? Or is it more for the client so that they understand what the journey could potentially look like? It sounds like it's both, but is there kind of a primary lean as you start to kind of build the platform out more? Is it more for the advisor, more for the client, or do you just kind of view it as kind of having a joint benefit?
I'll go back to my 3 E's. It helps educate them as to the correct use of a financial advisor. It helps put them in the right environment, right in the right portfolio, and it gives them that just-in-time encouragement. So, the thing that I always see, I've been speaking about behavioral finance to advisors for, about a decade now. And so consistently when I go to speak to a group of advisors, we have a good laugh because this stuff is funny. Human behavior is goofy and weird and funny, and it's cool to learn about. So everyone eats it up. Everyone loves it. People come up to me after the show and go, I love this stuff. I believe in it, but what do I do about it? How do I systematize this? How do I bake this into the very fabric of my practice? And that's where Tulip comes in, and that's where I think it can be powerful. It's just systematizing this. 83% of advisors already say that behavioral coaching is the biggest value that they add in their practice, but it's very sort of ad hoc right now. And so my hope is that Tulip will be successful in sort of streamlining and integrating this in a systematic way.
Yeah, that sounds pretty neat. I definitely want to go ahead and opt in and sign myself up. Is it still in beta, or have you released a version of it? Where is it currently?
Not released a version of it. So we're actually doing the exact thing that you're talking about. Is we're norming the data right now. We are giving it to thousands of people, so we'll know what the normal curve of different behaviors looks like. So everything from greed, fear, to overconfidence, to lack of confidence and excessive attention to the news and everything in between. So it's built right now. It's sort of functional but ugly. So we're in the process of making it look pretty, making it more intuitive, and also norming the data. And it should be ready probably about the end of Q1 of 2020.
Nice. Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to testing that out. I think, as you mentioned, there really aren't a lot of good tools for that. I mean, the closest one I can think of is, I guess, Riskalyze. We don't use that in our practice, but I guess what that does is it kind of asks a client a behaviorally driven questionnaire, and with the goal of identifying their risk tolerance, and it produces a score, which I think advisors probably get more out of than the client. Do you view this as a competitor to something like that, or is it in a completely different category? How would you view something like that?
So there's probably a 20 to 25% overlap between what Riskalyze does and what we do. So there's some common features, but not a ton. So if I'm thinking about sort of the Venn diagram, I'd say there's a 20 to 25% overlap. And I have nice things to say about Riskalyze. They've helped introduce this conversation in a meaningful way.
Nice.
And we're just hoping to take it that next level deeper.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. And then just so I can kind of wrap my head around it, it sounds like the advisor makes this available during the onboarding process, potentially even before the person signs the client contract, to get a better sense of who they're dealing with, and they get access to this dashboard. And I'm assuming both the client and the advisor have access to this dashboard, and then the alerts are sent to the advisor in the event that there's a market cycle or some type of, something happens that would create a behavioral trigger for the particular client that went through and selected the different, preferences around market cycles and things.
Yeah, so the dashboard, as what we call the dashboard, would only be available advisor. To the advisor to see sort of who among their clients is in which emotional state at which time. Yep. But what the client would have is a pretty cool report. And the neat thing about the report is it allows you to kind of go through your simulation and go, okay, here's my behavioral tendencies. I'm very emotional, say, so what would being less emotional do to my returns over a 30-year hypothetical time period? What would paying less attention to the news do in a very dollars and cents way to my returns? What would not being so conservative and so scared of being in equities have done to my returns? And so the cool thing about it, I think, from the client perspective, is it takes something ethereal like a behavior or an emotion, and it puts a real dollars and cents value on it. So I think that's going to be an invaluable tool for clients and advisors to have good conversations about this stuff.
For sure. Yeah, it's definitely going to work a lot better than telling a client that they could make a bad decision in the future when they're operating in a state where they don't make any bad decisions, right? It gives them the opportunity to work their way through a platform and realize that the decisions have real consequences. So I think it's a neat tool, man. Nice work. How long has this been in development? Have you been working on it for a number of years? Is this something just kind of popped up over the past couple quarters? Like, what's the life cycle of this?
So I'm learning that this stuff all takes a lot longer than I thought. So There's something in behavioral finance called the planning fallacy, which is effectively, you think everything's going to get done a lot faster than it does. And I have people call me about writing books, and they say, I got 2 or 3 months. You think I could knock out a book? And you go, not so fast. So we've been working on this in earnest for about a year, probably more like a year and a half in sort of the incubation early idea phase. But yeah, it's slower going than I would have liked, but we're committed to doing it right. And I think people will be excited about it.
Yeah. No, nice. We'll definitely keep us posted on that. I'll be sure to include a link in the episode below the show in the notes so that people can get access to the beta version. And then how are you planning on, I guess like any platform, is it going to be accessible to any advisor for just a monthly fee? Do you have to affiliate with a particular organization in order to use it? What's the distribution strategy look like?
So it would be premature for me to say much about the pricing model, which is very much a work in progress. But I could say a couple of things definitively, which is it'll be well integrated into a number of platforms, as well as available standalone, and it'll be product agnostic. So you won't have to use, any sort of specific product. So we'll just give you the good behavioral coaching. You fill in the gaps with what you'd like or what makes you comfortable.
Good stuff. So what's next in behavioral finance? Obviously this has been your focus for the past 18 months. What else do you have kind of going on? Is there another book in the works? Is there anything else that advisors should be, keeping up with as far as, making sure that they deliver better outcomes for their clients, or just things they need to be aware of in the behavioral finance arena?
So I think in terms of thought leadership, the development of behavioral finance has very much mirrored the development of psychology more broadly. So if you think about psychology kind of burst onto the scene not that long ago, just a couple hundred years ago, with Freud, who really popularized it. And Freud studied, what was wrong with you. He studied how you were broken, how you were sad, how your mom, messed you up, whatever.
Yep.
And it was only in the 90s, really, that we got positive psychology and solution-focused therapy, where we stopped studying how people are broken and we started studying, what makes people a great leader, what makes people happy, what gives people meaning in their lives. And so I think you're starting to see a turn in behavioral finance. It was important for behavioral finance to break with traditional economics and traditional finance and say, people are not perfectly rational. People don't make rational decisions. People are not, the average investor is not homo economicus, as it's called. But now that break has been well and truly established, the Nobel Prizes have been given out, I think behavioral finance can kind of turn its gaze on, what makes clients happy and what brings transcendent good into their lives, and how can we as advisors bring a little more meaning into this. So I think sort of a more positively focused behavioral finance is what to look out for. And, the second thing I would say is that just, tools like Tulip Advisor that help integrate behavioral finance into the very guts of what someone's doing. And it's not just this thing that advisors are doing off the side of their table, but it's very much a part of the core of their practice. So those are the two sort of trends I'd be on the lookout for.
What are your thoughts on, there's been a lot of, in the business coaching, performance coaching, there's a lot of talk about mindset, maintaining a mindset that's of abundance and that allows you to be successful. I've read a number of books, some of which I found to be a little hokey, some of which have actually helped me a lot. Being a psychologist and studying this and working with advisors, is there anything that you would recommend for advisors specifically if, maybe they've been stuck in a rut and they haven't been growing their practice as much as they had hoped? Maybe they're getting up in the morning and they're procrastinating. They're not working as hard as they would like, or they just feel like they're off track. I'm sure that a lot of the things that you've written about and you've studied have kind of, could be applied to that as well. Do you have any thoughts on that particular, topic in general, just the idea of being a higher performer or having a mindset that allows you to create more wealth and abundance in your life? What are your thoughts on things like that?
Yeah. So I have a lot of thoughts on this. So when we look at mindset, okay, so about 50% of your disposition, your mindset, if you will, is genetically hardwired. So, your predisposition to be, negative or happy or optimistic or pessimistic and the like, quick or slow to anger, about 50% of this is genetic. So some people, just sort of naturally have a better mindset than others. And there's not much you can do about that in some respects. Now, the remaining 50%, about 40% of it is down to choices that you make. And only about 10% is due to circumstantial things like, whether or not you get lucky in life. So we have some power, like we even have some sizable power, but there's also some considerable luck in this. So in general, I think we tend to overemphasize positivity. We tend to overemphasize mindset. We tend to overemphasize willpower. All of these things are kind of ephemeral. If you look at the behavioral research, I think the best thing that you can do is to put yourself in new places. Like if you want a new result, do a new thing. Like don't try and will yourself into, some power of positive thinking hokum, right? Like go try a new program, like get a new support group, get a new coaching program, try new behaviors, increase, we've talked a lot about the gym today. Go to the gym more, try a new diet, try something new, right? Place is a much better predictor of behavioral change than positivity. And so I would never, I'm not trying to poo-poo the power of positive thinking or having a positive mindset. That's all good stuff. That's all important stuff. But I think we tend to overemphasize it relative to making literal behavioral changes with respect to the kind of people you hang out with, the kind of books you read, the kind of places you find yourself in. All of those things are easier to do from a behavioral perspective. And I think they'll bring about quicker results that will then hopefully allow you to bring your mindset along as well.
Do you recommend like stark big changes across the board, or do you start with kind of small behavioral changes to see, how do you test whether something, let's say, influences you in a way that you're excited about and is producing positive outcomes versus maybe something that, isn't, like how do you, what are your thoughts on big sweeping changes versus just little kind of micro changes and kind of seeing, what's the feedback mechanism for that?
Yeah, so big sweeping changes, the desire to make big sweeping changes is one of the reasons why no one's New Year's resolutions stick, right? Because everyone, I think it's like 7% of people hit their New Year's, their New Year's goals. And the reason is, someone who hasn't gotten off the couch in a decade decides on December 31st that they're going to run a marathon next year. And it's just it's too much, right? So the best behavioral interventions are incremental, right? So first you run a mile, right? You run a mile, you run a mile, then you run a mile, then you run a 5K and so on until you can run that marathon. And oh yeah, all along the way, it's rewarding, right? All along the way, you pat yourself on the back, you're proud of yourself, you hold out some carrots and some rewards so that you make it a more palatable process. So yes, you're absolutely right. An object in motion tends to stay in motion. An object at rest tends to stay at rest. But make that first step. So take that big goal of yours, right? Like take that big goal of yours on the vision board and break it down into the 5 or 6 incremental steps along the way. And then take that first step and attach a reward to it. And I think you'll be pleased with what happens, because most people, especially at this time of year, try to do way, way too much.
Yeah, it's good advice. Have you noticed anything in particular in the research or just in your life that has allowed people to thrive? Is there any like small changes or big changes that you've seen in the data that says, wow, if everyone adopted this, they'd be much better off for doing it? So one in particular that I've seen that's worked well for me and for others is just kind of maintaining that mindset of being grateful for things. So just practicing a routine of just actively saying that you're grateful for certain things, and then more things will kind of just magically show up magically or not magically, but they just kind of show up for you. And that could be, in your opinion, that might just not be, I haven't read the research on it, and then I might be wrong, but what are your thoughts on that? Is there anything that you've seen that is convincingly, that shows up in the data or shows up in people's behavior time after time, and you're like, this is tried and true, you have to do these things because they will produce positive outcomes for you? Or what do you think?
Yeah, so there's so first of all, your gratitude example is a great one. There's a podcast that I would recommend called The Science of Happiness, where every week they go through sort of the science of behavior change, the science of happiness, and they take things that are talked about in the literature, and they just live it. They live it for a week or 2 weeks or a month. And on a recent episode, they were talking about gratitude journals, because as simple as it sounds, the magic you're talking about, the magic of seeing good things everywhere when you keep a gratitude journal, is really just a form of confirmation bias, which is like you see what you're looking for. So when you're looking for good things to happen, like you start seeing good things, and vice versa. When you're looking for the world to be against you and the world to suck, like you can find that if you're looking for it. So gratitude journal is a very powerful thing. There's a model of happiness called the PERMA model, PERMA, that talks about these sort of 5 facets of happiness. I would encourage everyone to look at that. But the R in the PERMA model is the one that I'll talk about, which is relationships. So there's a lot of overlap between nutritional and fitness type goals and financial goals, both because they're both of them are sort of easy to know what to do, but hard to do, like hard to implement. And I read an article recently that said the best predictor there were 2 best predictors of weight loss. And so one of the predictors in this study was frequent feedback. So weighing yourself every couple of days. So you just have an accurate sense of how you're doing, and you're accountable. And then the second one was whether or not the people closest to you, it's kind of the people you hang out with on the regular, had gained or lost weight. So we're all benchmarking, whether it be with our stock returns or our weight or fitness or anything else, to the people around us. So the longer I live, the more powerful I believe relationships to be, from everything from happiness to gratitude to trying to make changes. If you want to make changes in the new year, surround yourself with people for whom those changes are the norm. So going back to our gym example, you want to get in shape in the new year, surround yourself with people for whom going to the gym is just what you do, right? Like it's just second nature. And soon you'll become one of them. You'll become one of those people. So, there's 5 in that model, but relationships I think are probably my favorite.
And you said that was called the PERMA model?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, PERMA, PERMA.
The podcast was Science of Happiness, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Nice, man. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. We're pretty much at time here, but I mean, I've got like a million questions as it relates to behavioral psychology and those types of things. I mean, for anyone looking for personal development and growth, I mean, is there any other resources that you would recommend? Because I feel like that's big for financial advisors, especially if you're an entrepreneur, because you're always going to have blind spots, and those blind spots that you have personally are going to become manifest in your business, in your relationships, in your life. Any other resources that you've seen that, the average entrepreneurial advisor who's listening to the podcast, well, let's say above average because they're listening to the podcast, could benefit from if they, deployed them in their life and their business?
Yeah, I'd be sort of hesitant to recommend any of the coaching services out there, but not because they're not good, just because I'm not aware of how they compare. I think if you just want a cheap, easy place to start, go Google behavioral finance reading list and go read 3 or 4 behavioral finance books with this specific mindset, with the mindset to look at these things as a mirror and not a window. So I think many times when advisors read books like mine, they do so as a window into their clients' lives, like, a window into why their clients do the things that they do. But I think if you read good behavioral finance books with an eye to them as a mirror into your own behavior, and as a way to deepen your insights into your own actions, I think you have a much richer experience, and you become much more cognizant that you're no different or better really than your clients when it comes to doing silly things in life and with your money. So that's sort of where I'd start for a cheap, easy place to start in the new year.
Thanks, Daniel. Full of great advice, man. Really appreciate you coming on the podcast. Thanks for sharing your perspective. We'll be sure to include links to all the books, the Tulip Advisor website, and I recommend everyone subscribe to that and get access so you can get updated on its progress. So, Daniel, thank you so much for coming on the show, and look forward to hopefully having you as a guest in the future.
My pleasure. Happy to do it.